they didn't know how to fly an airplane. I mean, you think, you know, I should go that way, and they'd take off and go that way, you know, and it was just, God, it was the hardest thing in the world I ever had to do. But you know, those kids, they were afraid to go upside down. And I loved going upside down. And I could not get those kids to do it. P40 was my best.
You like the
But
P40?
I had P45s and P50s and things like that.
Yeah.
And I could fly all of those, no problem at all. But other kids wouldn't try to fly these other aircraft.
Right.
We had a lot of them, and no kids would fly them. I flew them, but a lot of kids just didn't want to fly it. So I'm probably about the dumbest of any guy in the world to try to teach pilots how to fly. Jesus. Have you ever had that? Where you're trying to fly, learn to fly, and have you ever had that? And
No,
have you had any problems?
I've never done that. I've
Never have any problems?
No,
Never?
no.
Well, I must be a dummy then, because
Well, you're ahead of me. I don't know how to fly.
I could do anything. I could fly upside down, and everybody would all say, "How do you do that?" You know, and the hell, they didn't know what to do, and I didn't want them to. I didn't want them to because they didn't know how.
Yeah.
But they wanted to do it, and it was scaring me that I was going to get in trouble because these kids are out there and they're having what they think is good flying, and they weren't good flying. By gosh.
I went into the National Guard in '39, and we were pulled in I think we were pulled in December of '40, but they left us home for Christmas, and we actually went down to Camp Edwards, Massachusetts, in January of '41. Well, I went off to OCS. I graduated from OCS. Well, while we were in OCS, somebody came up and said, "Anybody want to go to flying school?" So, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 of us said yes. They sent us over to the airfield, and the flight surgeon gave us a physical. He says, "Okay, you get out of OCS, you'll be going to flight school." So I graduated from OCS December 10th in '42. They gave me 10 days to go home. And the 20th, I reported into Denton, Texas for the initial flight training. Well, we did the flight training there, then went up to Fort Sill for the advanced training,
Right.
which is the short field and the adjusting artillery and all that. And I guess I got out of Fort Sill, I'm going to say May or June, I'm not sure when, and went to Fort Shelby, or Camp, then it was Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and joined the 941st Field Artillery. It was a separate field artillery battalion. We went out to Louisiana maneuvers. From there we went to desert maneuvers. From desert maneuvers we went to Boston and climbed on a ship and went to England. When we got to England, seems to me we got to England around April, March or April. We became 5th Corps Artillery. The 941st was a separate battalion in 5th Corps Artillery. And we did a few things, just fooling around. And then they come up and says, "Okay, we're going to go down to Bournemouth get set. So this was to get set to go over to, yeah. So we went down to Bournemouth and we did all kinds of things to the airplane and all that. We're getting ready to take off, and on D+4, this guy come up and says, we think that the Germans are going to try to use gas to push us back into the channel. So you got to put on impregnated clothing. You know how thick, that's how it felt. So I've got a Mae West on, I've got that on, I've got a parachute on my back. Now we're getting ready to take off, and along comes some guy and says, well, if you go down in that ocean, you got to have a boat. So they gave us a boat that was about so big that sat right underneath us on the seat that we're sitting in. Now with me it was all right, but we had a guy, I can't remember, Jack, what was Jack's last name? I don't know, anyway, Jack. He was 6'1". I don't know how he got through flight school at 6'1". But after he put all that stuff on, you ever been in an L4 Piper Cub?
No, I've seen them, I haven't been in one.
Well, you know you got ailerons out there.
Right.
The wire for those ailerons goes right over your head. Jack, with all that junk and that over his head. So we took off. There was 13 of us in that flight, all 5th Corps artillery airplanes. And they gave us that boat. If we went down, we couldn't have hit the water if we wanted to. There was 4 rows of ships going over, 4 rows of ships coming back. I think if you had an engine failure, if you were high enough, you might be able to get out the other side of it.
The Pennsylvania State Guard was federalized and moved to Indiantown Gap. At that time, the services were segregated, and they formed a state guard to take the place of the National Guard. And I became an enlisted man in the Pennsylvania State Guard in the Engineer Battalion, which was stationed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I rose from private to sergeant, to top sergeant in the Guard, and then I was commissioned as a second lieutenant after attending a course at the Valley Forge Military Academy to go to the Air Force and join the Tuskegee Airmen, but I failed the Air Force recruiting because of my eyes. I had astigmatism, and they did not take people with glasses. Then in 1944, the Navy decided that since I was in the shipbuilding business, that they would draft me, and I didn't want to go to the Navy because at that time the only thing that I could be was a messman or a fireman stoking boilers in the Navy. And I'd already had a commission in the Army or in the State Guard, so I went to the Army and said I would volunteer to be a private in the infantry if I could get out of going to the Navy, and they said yes, and I was inducted. Inducted into the Army in 1944.
And we were doing with the helicopters, command, flying the general around, and the other VIPs, and we also did the L-19 flying with the observing and adjusting artillery fire and directing thing, but a lot of it was taking the patrol leaders out so they could find out where they were going to go that night on their patrols. Total, I flew about 3,000 hours while I was in the service. Flew a lot of desks, which took up a lot of time, and but I had, as I said before, I had 3-year exchange duty with the Navy, and I got to fly the jets with the Navy and, their fixed wing and some helicopters, HRS and the HUP.
Did you fly off carriers?
No, didn't fly off carriers. We were strictly land-based, and we did off of the airfields.
Yeah.
And we did close air support training for the Navy. And the squadron was based at Alameda Naval Air Station, but we traveled back and forth 6 months every year. We were deployed to the Pacific. Most memorable experiences? Well, I had one frightening one in Korea there with a helicopter. I took a doctor to see a patient in one of the places, and when we was getting towards the end of the day, and we started back in, and it got dark, and we didn't have many navigation aids that time, just a compass, and we got sort of disoriented, as they say. But we always carried extra gas on things, and we were running low and still hadn't gotten back to our base that we were operating out of. It was a guerrilla operation, so we were in the guerrilla areas where they were trying to wipe those up, clean them up after the push went forward. And we saw some lights, and I knew that the guerrillas didn't have any vehicles, so we stopped and let the doc out and asked him to go check it with the convoy out there where they were heading. And while he was doing that, I was filling gas in the helicopter, and I didn't want to shut it off, afraid it might not start. And when I got it halfway into the tank out there, the 5-gallon can that I was pouring it in with hit the stabilizer bar on the helicopter, and it flew out of my hands, and I thought I was shot. But got that corrected. He come back and he says, they're going to the same place that we're heading. So I picked it up, and we followed the road that they were on and got to the back home. Nobody missed us, but it was an interesting flight. There were no lights on the helicopter that we had, so I had to use, the doc used his eye scope, that he used to look in the ears and things. So he lit up the instrument panel while we were flying.
High-tech stuff?
So I took field artillery basic training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and qualified for officer candidate school. And that sounded like a better way to go anyway. So my past record and academic records and things assured me a decent shot at it. And so I suddenly became an OCS Class 179 field artillery, which is the last World War II OCS, field artillery OCS. They didn't do any more of that for a couple of years. That was I graduated in December of 1946. I'd been in the Army about 8 months. I was, my branch was AUS, Army of the United States, which no longer exists, but is a pickup of reserves, Guard, regular Army, all the rest of that at that time was the overall. And you could be a non-citizen and be in the AUS. They didn't realize that at Division Artillery 1st Cavalry Division, because they promoted me to first lieutenant, awarded me a brand new first lieutenant Officers Reserve Corps commission, and I'm headed out. I couldn't figure out why in the world they paid me for this. I just had so much fun I couldn't stand it. All of a sudden I was way back 100 miles south of Nagano, where the Olympics were, on a Jeep with a sergeant and an interpreter. We'd been breaking into some warehouses for rubber goods and stuff like that. And Bunny Martin came buzzing over me in an L5, and he threw out a message on the road and said, "Siley, get your ass into Division Artillery as fast as you can." And I says, so he found a place to land. I left the sergeant, he could get back to the military government team, and flew back with Bunny. And I came, "What is all this?" Said, "Well, you're illegal. We've got to tear off your commission. You're in bad shape. You've got to get you home very, very fast. They're going to discharge you as you go through California." And I cried a little bit to General Palmer. And he got a hold of General Chase, the CAV commander, Division Artillery commander, who had a lot of friends in Washington. And they said, "Here's what we'll do." And he says, "We're going to appoint you, because we can't take your commission away right now. We're going to appoint you as the custodian of the Far East Strength Reports, top secret stuff. And we've got to take it, your orders will read for hand delivered to the Adjutant General of the United States Army." So I had a better priority than the president's dog did. Fala, who was Roosevelt's dog, flew back in a C-54 that had been hauling coal to Berlin.
Hauling coal?
Into Berlin. And I was in really good shape back there, laying on mail bags and my stuff, which was locked to my wrist. But they everywhere we landed to get fuel or anything like that, I had a guard, and came back into Bowling Field. And they had a sedan waiting for me. No, it was a panel truck, really, with my stuff in there. And they took me into the Pentagon, and somebody, Lieutenant Colonel Montgomery, I'll never forget that guy, said, "Lieutenant, we better get you washed up. You got coal on you, and you're miserable looking, and you got to report to the AGO." So we did, and he said, "I've heard from all kinds of people about you. What do you want to do?" I said, I want to get my United States citizenship, and I want to stay in the Army." He said, "Well, it looks like a lot of people thought maybe you could do that." So he set me up as the Executive Officer, Headquarters Company, U.S. Army, South Force, Fort Myer. And I had 3 or 4 months then to get my commission. I mean, my citizenship. He said, "Well, where do you want to go now?" My health was failing from all the ladies in Washington. Second lieutenant, I was making about first lieutenant, $180 a month, trying to live big in Washington, D.C. I said, "I got to get out of this town." And this is Colonel Montgomery. He said, "Well, I know a guy down the hall. They got an aviator down the hall. He does everything for the aviation. J. Elmore Swenson. He was a major, and he was running everything having to do with Army flyers. He called me down there and said, I told him that I wanted to go to flight school, and he called somebody, and I was on way to flight school 30 days after that.
When I had my first assignment, I don't even know the names of the types now. The long weapon, long cannon down at Shelby, Camp Shelby, is it? It's Camp Shelby. That was my first assignment. They were short of pilots. They had taken that clean sweep, took them all the ones that fought in the Pacific with the division, and they had high pointers. You accumulated points to get out. They took them all out. So that there was no air section, no air officer, nothing, except me. I welcomed the opportunity to join the 11th Airborne because I did always want to jump. And when I was assigned to Japan, I was told that we had missions over the mountains in a Cub. And I figured, well, I can't, the mountains are this way, and I'm flying this way. There's no give. So I better learn how to jump. And I did it. And perhaps you call that selfishly. I don't think so. I was just thinking of protecting my butt.
I completed the course, and the war was over, of course, and I tried to go regular Army, and they didn't need any second lieutenants, apparently, because I didn't get it. So I got out of the service.
And in those days, the Army this is history to you, didn't have anything. We had to go to Air Force Flight School. I attended Conley Air Force Base, graduating as an L pilot in June of 1950, on up to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for some artillery training, and because of my maintenance background, was assigned to one of only 2 aircraft maintenance units in the Army, detailed to the 46th Ordnance Light Aircraft Maintenance Company, and we shipped to Korea to help with the Pusan perimeter problem. I
recall one mission I was on. There were several of us on it. We were flying to Gifu and north of Gifu, and coming back through Kyoto, there's a mountain range between Kyoto and Otsu, and there was a snowstorm. I was the last guy in this gaggle, and everybody made it through, and the snow became thicker by the time I got there. So I made a couple of circles, and finally I had guts enough to make it all the way through, which I did, fortunately and safely. Service missions in those days were with L4s, and this was a common thing. One thing back at Springfield, Captain Herman Lee